Okay, welcome back. So the next article was using a trade book as an instructional tool. So a trade book is anything other than a textbook. So any book you would go to the library and get, or Barnes and Noble, anything like that. So Helen, and I'm probably going to mess up her name, Felsenthal, I believe, did an article regarding using it as an instructional tool. Her belief is the teaching of literature is not possible. Rather, literature is experienced. So we teach students what literature is and how it functions so then they can experience it. And so really thinking about the elements of different genres, and so students can take that information and then understand the text. And then providing them questions to ask with a specific genre so that they can understand it as they're reading. So the two major, of course, genres that she looked at were fiction and nonfiction. And with fiction, really looking at character and plot and setting, those three major categories. And then students have to learn to ask questions about those three areas in order to make meaning of the story. And she also talked about the 4 different types of fiction. So realistic fiction, where it's a story that could happen but didn't happen. Fanciful fiction, which is more like Little Red Riding Hood, where the wolf comes to life as a person and has conversation. And then historical fiction, where it talks about a historical event that happened and looks at it from a character's point of view, but may not be an actual story. And then biographical fiction, again, taking a famous American or famous person in history and writing a story about them that may or may not be true. With nonfiction, you're looking at 2 major types, expository or informational, and argumentative or persuasive. And the concentration areas there include theme, point of view, facts and opinions, cause and effect, conclusions, generalizations, ambiguities, and the author's purpose. So nonfiction, as you can tell, is going to take a lot more study. With the adoption of the Common Core State Standards, which, as you probably know, Missouri has abandoned, but some of the good things that came out of that were that teachers were required to teach more nonfiction. We see, especially in the primary grades, a focus on mainly fiction. But when we look at the complexity of nonfiction, as well as the utility of nonfiction in our everyday life, we see the importance of that. So we need to keep that in mind as we're planning instructional goals and units. So what I'd like to do here is really talk about the ways you and the strategies that you use to teach the different structures of text, and then how to interpret those texts. So what does that look like in your classroom currently? So let's turn and talk, and we'll pause the video here. All right, welcome back, and now we're going to talk a little bit about book illustrations and how we need to teach kids the key to visual and verbal literacy, and how important that is in understanding text. And John Stawig is the author of this particular article. And he talks about that we have to help students become aware of illustrations as an extension of the story, and it actually increases literacy. 80% of the information we receive daily comes to us visually. And so we have to teach students how to read or make sense of that visual input. If you think about media nowadays, it's all very, very visual. So from video games to TV newscast to, my boys are obsessed with YouTube videos. All of those things are very, very visual. And sometimes they don't even have to listen to the words being spoken in the videos. They can just look at the visual content of the videos and capture meaning from that. So it's really important that we help students be able to read that visual input. So the three major subskills that he talks about with visual and verbal literacy are describing what you see objectively, comparing two different objects, and then learning to determine and compare the value of those. These are taught sequentially, and you can see they move from less to more complex, and really a student needs to master the first before they move on. However, you could do this in a series of lessons or in a unit. So first of all, they're going to describe what they see objectively, and the 3 C's you want to look at here: that they clearly describe it, that they can concisely describe it, and that it's concrete, so that we understand it. And so those are kind of the 3 major pieces that they need to hit when they're describing an illustration or an object. Then take 2 different objects representing the same thing, and using those descriptors, compare those 2 objects. And so a way that you can do that is using the same story that has different illustrations, and talk about how those illustrations influence the way we understand that story or perceive that story. And we're going to do an activity with that in just a moment. And then the last piece is really to determine and compare the value. So which picture do they prefer? And here's the big piece: why? So what is it about that visual input or that illustration or photograph that really helps them understand and make meaning of the story? Or why do they think this particular illustration is better suited for the telling of the story? So let's try it. So what you'll see here is I have different representations of Little Red Riding Hood. So I want you to kind of look through those representations and discuss as a class. So how do they differ? And which one do you like best as a portrayal of Little Red Riding Hood? And why do you feel like that portrayal is the best and connected to the story? So we're going to pause the recording here and let you have a discussion about that. So hopefully you had a pretty lively discussion, and I can't wait to hear Dr. Glazer tell me how it went. Hopefully it was good. And hopefully it helped you to see how illustrations do play a very important role in looking at a text and understanding and comprehending a text. So try it with your kids and let me know, and I'd love for you to share with us, kind of how that went. The next article that we're going to dive into is Reading Leads to Writing. I'm not even going to attempt to say Richard's last name. However, he really talks about the connection between reading and writing, which we're really going to focus on somewhat in our class too, as evidenced by the assignments that you're going to be doing. So he talks about how reading helps improve writing style through the act of hearing the vocabulary, the construction of the sentences, how grammar is used, how the author arranges things syntactically, the organizational procedures they use, and then the approach. So those serve as models or mentor text, if you will, for children's writing. He also states that students can effectively tell or write a story until they're exposed to good models of that writing through literature. So students don't really have a conceptual basis for what good writing is until they've been shown good writing, bad writing, and all those in between, to really help them hone in on what are the elements of good writing. When children write, they read more and they become more involved in language and the use of language. And it kind of gets caught up into that cycle of giving and taking words. And oftentimes that'll gain momentum and accelerate their progress in both reading and writing. Research has long proven the reciprocality of reading and writing. And when students are poor readers, they tend to be poor writers, or if they're avid readers, they tend to be better writers. And so that connection definitely is there. He goes on to talk about the way in which writing is received by the group when it's written may have more to do with encouraging a student to write than the stimuli to motivate them to write. So when you look at, say, a writer's workshop piece, and you have the author's chair, or you have a sharing time where students are actually publishing their work and sharing it and getting feedback and reactions from their peers or from you as the teacher, those are often way more powerful motivators to increase motivation in writing than, say, finding something of interest for them to write about. And oftentimes they will stretch themselves and write about things that they may not have as much background knowledge on if they have received positive feedback and accolades, if you will, from presenting their writing and being seen as an author. So the importance of having them share their writing and having that be a positive experience for them often is the best motivator. So let's turn and talk about how do your students share their writing and get feedback on their writing, or what might be some ideas you have to encourage that. I will tell you, I work with some students with significant disabilities, and we implement a writer's workshop, and we have the author's chair. And I had one teacher share a story with me about they always did author's chair on Friday. And it just so happened they were going to be out of school on Friday for teacher work day. And at the beginning of the week when they were doing their organizer of, what they were going to cover that week, they got to Friday and she talked about that they would not have school on Friday. And the student immediately raised his hands and said, but wait, what about author's chair? Where are we going to move author's chair? So that just goes to show you how excited students can get about sharing their writing and getting that feedback. So let's stop here and let you have the opportunity to turn and talk about how you have students share their writing. All right, the final article that we're going to look at is Reading Comprehension Through Creative Dramatics by Mary Jett Simpson. And basically, what she says is instead of asking boring comprehension questions, if you really, really want to know if a student understands and gets a deeper meaning from the text, have them act it out. Because they have to really attend to not only the surface facts of a story, but the deeper meaning of the story when they're engaging in that dramatic process. So this aids in that abstract or critical thinking, and they kind of become insiders enmeshed in the story. And it often deals with the story as a whole because they have to know beginning, middle, and end in order to act it out. And they really see the interaction or interwovenness of characters, plot, and setting. And so, as that is the focus of drama. So using drama to measure comprehension might be a new idea to you, but definitely lends itself to those higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So turn and talk real quick. Have you used drama for a measure of comprehension in your classroom? Or what might that look like in your classroom where you could have kids work on that? So take a moment and turn and talk about that. All right, welcome back. And so hopefully those underpinnings were helpful to you, and you have kind of a basis of where we're going with the class. Let's turn and talk a little bit about next week. You have several chapters, however, not a ton of pages, but several chapters. Chapters are kind of short and sweet. We're going to read chapters 1, 2, and 3 from Study Driven, and chapter 1 from Children's Literature. So be prepared to discuss those in class next week. And I hope you guys have a great week, and I look forward to seeing you in class next week.